Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ethical Decision Making Framework webinar. I'm Vicky at ACFID's Learning Team. Before we start, can I please have a show of hands to confirm the sound is coming through? On the screen, there is a raise hand button. If you don't see it, move your cursor to the bottom. And if you're using a mobile phone, just tap on the screen. Great, and I can see your hands. Before I hand over to our speakers, I'll quickly go through some housekeeping matters. Today's webinar will be recorded and uploaded to ACFID's YouTube channel. When the link is ready, I'll send everyone a follow-up email and forward a copy of the presentation slides. After the webinar, you'll be directed to a page. When prompted, please click on the continue button to complete a quick survey. We are very keen to hear your feedback. During the presentation, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A area. You can see the button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. Please remember to type in your questions, use the Q&A area. And towards the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions using the microphone. If you want to speak, please press the raise hand button to let us know. When prompted, click unmute myself. If your microphone is set up properly, we should be able to hear you. Now, without further ado, I'll now hand over to our speakers, Emily and Jill. Emily, thanks.
Thanks, Vicky. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see us here as well now. Welcome again to this webinar. We're really glad to have all of you here to talk about this really interesting topic. And we've had some great interest in it so far. So thank you for joining us. As Vicky said, my name's Emily Morton. I work on the code team at ACFID in the Standards and Code team. As part of my role, I get the privilege of looking at your organisation's reporting against the Code of Conduct. And we also work to create guidance such as the one we're going to talk about today and other things to help support members to better understand the code and also to think about how it might apply in practice. So I'll be presenting today along with Jill Farrar, and she's been working with ACFID to develop this new guidance. So Jill, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So thanks for having me today, Emily and ACFID. I'm a communications consultant and I've worked in this sector in comms for over 12 years now. I worked for a few of the larger NGOs in the development sector. And this year, I was contracted to work for ACFID to develop these guidelines on how to create an ethical decision-making framework for communications. So yeah, I'm just here today to explain a few aspects of the EDMF, how we created it, why we created it, and answer your questions.
Fantastic. So as Vicky mentioned at the beginning, just a few housekeeping things. We are keen to get your questions throughout the webinar by typing them in, and we'll either deal with them as we go or perhaps at the time at the end. And you'll have a chance to ask questions verbally as well at the end if you'd like to. We really understand that this is the start of a journey. And so if you have any feedback or want to ask questions after the webinar, if you're mulling things over and you still want to follow something up, then our contact details will be available on the last slide, and we welcome all communication in that way. Okay, so what we'll be covering today, we're going to take a quick look into the guidance that's been developed and is up on the website now for you to have a look at. We'll have a look at what is an EDMF, why we might have one, and go through an example as well. And I'll also talk to you a little bit about the Code of Conduct requirements, what is in the code, what isn't, how to interpret that, and talk you through some of the key steps that your organisation might need to go through or would like to go through when thinking about how to either develop an EDMF for the first time or perhaps to review what you already have in place and how you might need to tweak that. And hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions at the end as well. And just to point out that we will be saying EDMF a lot, and to save us all having to listen to ethical decision-making framework. So yeah, get ready for that one. All right, so I thought I'd start out just by sharing a little bit about how the guidance itself was developed and why. And those of you who are ACFID members will know that this is part of a longer conversation that we've been having over the last few years. And some of you here might have been participants in workshops over the last couple of years, delving into some of the issues around ethical communications and how do we make decisions when it's not so clear. So when the code was revised in 2017, it included some specific guidance around images, information and stories that shouldn't be used, so kind of no-go zones. But it also recognised that a lot of the time in making decisions about what to use in our communications content, in our fundraising, marketing materials, that sometimes it's not that easy to know if something should be used or shouldn't. And so this guidance and the introduction of an ethical decision-making framework in the code was a result of trying to kind of deal with those more ethical grey areas, hence the range of greys here. So I guess it's trying to fill a gap perhaps in what organisations might have. But in saying that, the term EDMF might be quite a new one. It might not be something that you've heard a lot about before, but we just wanted to, I guess, from the outset, acknowledge that a lot of the issues that might be brought up in the webinar today and in the guidance document are hopefully things that your organisations are already thinking about. But they might go to another level, or they might go a slightly different direction to how you think about them now. So even though the concept might be quite new, we know, our members are doing fantastic work, and people working in these areas are making ethical decisions and thinking about these things really carefully all the time in their work. And also the guidance itself has been developed to reflect the diversity of ACFID's membership. So we're really privileged as ACFID to have such a range of organisations in our membership, and the guidance itself will need to be tailored to your organisation. So you might have a look at it and think, well, how is that going to look for us? That might be relevant in some situations, but maybe not for how you work. So we really encourage you to dive into the guidance and think about what it might look like for your organisation. So we're going to just very quickly now take you and show you where the guidance is. And now I know that we have quite a number of you today here who are also currently completing your application for membership for ACFID, so it's great to have you along as well. So this is the Good Practice Toolkit in the Code of Conduct. So you can look for it here. It's under Quality Principle 6 and 6.2. You can find it on the side. So the guidance is available online as this website. It's interactive. You can go down. It's divided up into different sections. You can jump in and out as you wish. It might, from the outset, look like a lot of information, and it is, but I'd encourage you to take it piece by piece. And there's a lot of extra information in there as well to support you as you keep thinking about these issues. I'm not going to go through it all right now, but another thing just to point out is you can download it as a PDF, and if you need an accessible version, you can download the Word document. To support the guidance itself, we've got a series of fact sheets. These fact sheets dive into some of the issues in a bit more detail. They're not meant to be exhaustive, but they're a great first starting point if you want to think about certain issues. So you can have a look. I think we've got one here, protecting identities. What does that actually mean? How does it fit into the code as well? And then just some tips and tricks about how you might start doing that. And as you read through them, you might find that lots of them you are doing, but hopefully there's a few little ideas there for you to think about as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over to Jill now, and Jill's going to talk a little bit more about what is an EDMF, what it might look like and why we might have one as well. So Jill, over to you. Yep.
Okay. Great. So an EDMF, you may not know what this term is. I admit that I didn't know the term at the start of this year, but it's may sound like a complicated term, but it basically outlines ethically important moments and the kinds of issues that you need to address at those moments. So that's what the framework does. It doesn't necessarily say this is the right thing or this is the wrong thing to do at different times. It creates a way for you to have, I guess, guided conversations at important moments in your storytelling process. And the aim of that, of course, is to make more ethical decisions and also to, I guess, explore the risk landscape that you're working in when you're creating communications. So I'm just going to jump straight in and show you the example that we created. So it's down here. It's got here we go. So there's 3 sections. I'm not going to take you through everything. I'll just show you a few key points. The introduction is just, you know, an introduction as to what an EDMF is for those who don't know, the scope, and also importantly how it links to your other policies, because the EDMF will be interlinked with all your other policies that relate to communications. We've got some example text here, which you can look at as an example of the kind of content that you'll want to have in these sections. Our values, I'll just go to this section here. So our values should be, you know, explaining the parts of your EDMF that link to bigger commitments that you've made. So connections to the UN and any other ethics documents. And yeah, and then listing out the other policies that it connects to. So that's intro. The main bulk of your EDMF is this section. So importantly, I want to point out the risk assessment. So a little bit later, I'll explain a bit more about the risk assessment that should be happening when you develop your EDMF as a key step to creating it. But that risk assessment needs to be referenced in the EDMF itself once it's created, so that it's very clear, you know, this is the risk landscape, and this is how we navigate it. Other bits are fairly straightforward here, the ethically important moments. So when I was saying what is an EDMF, it's ethically important moments plus what you do at those moments. This is an example of possible ethically important moments. As you know, Emily was saying before, this is just an example. So because your organisation, every organisation is different, it may be different for every organisation. But these are, you know, an overview of commonly common moments when you may want to be picking up your EDMF and working through some of the steps. So yeah, those are the moments, and these are the key ethical issues that we came about through a reasonable amount of research, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But you can look through these and see. So there's questions in here under specific themes. Of course, this will be different for every organisation as well. but this is an example of the kinds of issues that you'll want to talk about. Yeah, so that's pretty much the biggest parts of it, and then there's just some definitions. So I'm going to jump back to the slides. Right, that's where you find it. So now that you've had a chance to just have a look at what the example EDMF looks like, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about why you might want to have an EDMF, and I guess where it came from. So one of the really big points around why you want to have an EDMF is that it helps you to address risk related to communications, and yeah, lay out that risk landscape if you haven't already done so, and make it very clear for all your stakeholders, you know, what that landscape looks like and how you're addressing risk, and of course in order to protect your stakeholders. But another really important part of the EDMF is that it should be helping you, because you have you know, an expanded understanding of your risk landscape, is that you'll be able to do new things with more confidence. And one of the important drivers behind why this EDMF guidance has come about in the first place is because of the rapidly changing digital publishing landscape that we're in these days. Importantly, you know, smartphone use and the high quality of smartphone cameras means that a lot more people are able to create content rather than, you know, 10 years ago. It's a totally different landscape. So there's a lot more content being created by NGOs, by everyone in the world. And that increase in content has meant that, you know, there's sort of more risk being faced by organisations, especially non-professional communicators. So one thing we have been talking about, Emily and I, is that, you know, a lot of this stuff, when you look through those, you know, key issues and the key moments and so on, people whose job is communications or multimedia or marketing, they may look at that and go, oh yeah, and you know, that's what we do. You know, but it's good to see it written down. But when organisations start sourcing out the collection of content to people who aren't professionals, so all of those people with smartphones, they may not have the professional training that others whose job it is normally will have. So one of the really important reasons to have this EDMF is to help those people to navigate all of the ethics that are around communications and the risk and so on. Yeah, and also to upskill any staff, because, you know, new people come into the sector, they may not understand the communications needs and the ethics that are involved that are specific to this sector. There's a few whys. So ethical grey areas. So Emily talked a little bit about the grey areas before. The EDMF should help you make decisions quicker. It should help you to make quality decisions. And as well as helping you to address the greys, you know, you don't know, should I use this image, shouldn't I, is it dignified, is it not, so on. It should also help you to uncover the things that you don't know as well. Well, that's the hope anyway, because there is material in there on unconscious bias, and the framework itself creates a language and an understanding of key areas, which perhaps you haven't thought about before, or perhaps you haven't reflected on the way that you approach something, and it helps you to broaden your view and perhaps take another look at the way you approach things. High volume of communications content. Yeah, so I was saying before, you know, the digital publishing landscape has radically changed in the last 10 years. And this EDMF is trying to address that. You know, it's just one way of doing that, but from an ethical point of view, helping you to make decisions faster. And of course, the end result we all hope is that not only are your communications more ethical, but hopefully they're more effective too at communicating your message in a way that really connects with people, because your values are upfront and you know, they're not being perhaps muddied by some misunderstandings or unconscious bias or who knows what else. So yeah, those are just a few reasons of why to have an EDMF. And I'll just say a couple of words on how we went about creating the EDMF. Oh, are we taking questions as we go, or yeah?
We can, or we can take questions, or we can deal with them at the end.
Okay, well, I might just take this question now. So we've had a question from Jonathan. How were rights holders involved in development of EDMF? I think Emily, you might want to.
Yeah, so Jonathan, I think maybe we need some clarity around the rights holders, but I'm assuming you mean sort of people on the ground or partners that people are working with. So in terms of the guidance itself, the guidance has been created in consultation with ACFID members. And so then I guess the next step, this is a first sense of where organisations might take their EDMF or how they might start implementing it. So because ACFID itself is not working with rights holders or primary stakeholders on the ground, that's the process that we've gone through at the moment. I hope that's answered. We might come back to it. If it's not, you can maybe rephrase that for us. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so part of the process of creating the EDMF was to do a consultation on the draft that went out to the members. But the process started with research. So I had previously worked at Save the Children and developed a storytelling guidelines document for them over the period of a few years. It wasn't an EDMF exactly, but it touched on a lot of similar things, and I did some research for that. And when I came to work on this EDMF guidance for ACFID, I went a few steps further than I did at Save the Children, and looked at a wider range of materials on ethics, best practice, guidance materials for image use, and so on. And you can find those documents, many of them, in the extra resources section, section 6. But yeah, just a quick overview of the main approaches. So human rights ethics, of course, is really important. So that's, you know, UN conventions and declarations, right to participation. I've got a few notes here, which I find. Okay. Sorry. Yes, and I looked at quite a few different codes of ethics from different disciplines that have similar approaches. So I looked at sociology, medical research, internet research, general sciences, because they also collect data about real people and then publish that data. So they actually have similar processes in a way. I also looked at feminist ethics of care. So that looks at power differences between actors. And so in this case, we have a very large power difference between the organisations that provide services and the beneficiaries and stakeholders. Democratic theory, which is fairly straightforward, it's right to self-determination, human rights, and so on, informed consent, and documentary studies. So using real life stories in visual and written formats, and ethic guidelines around those. So yes, that was fun. Here are some people who answer similar questions or face similar questions. So it was really good to look at this range of materials when putting together this EDMF. This research helped to create those 6 key issues that you see as the recommended issues to discuss at different points in time. So I have a reasonable amount of confidence that they are representative of at least a baseline of what these ACFID organisations may face. But of course, this EDMF is a first. It's a first step for ACFID. It's also the first that I could find on communications on the World Wide Web. So we're just taking it as a first step, and of course would love to hear people's feedback as they start to implement them. So I think we're moving on to the...
Okay, well, of course, one of the other reasons why you might be thinking about developing an EDMF is code compliance. And so I thought I'd just run you through a little bit about where EDMFs sit in the code and what are the things we're actually looking for in terms of compliance. And the guidance itself goes beyond compliance, but I thought this is a good point to just refresh. So ethical decision-making frameworks are found in 2 areas in the code. So if you're familiar with it, we have verifiers in the code, and they're the way that members demonstrate that they're meeting various commitments. So for ethical decision-making frameworks, they're held under Quality Principle 6 for communications, and they're also part of the ACFID fundraising charter, and that's in Quality Principle 8. So as Jill said, the example that's provided in the guidance is that it's an example for you to adapt and think about for your organisation. There are a few things specifically in the code that we ask you to include, but how you format that or lay it out or integrate it with other policies that you have is up to you. So in Quality Principle 6, your ethical decision-making framework needs to align with the values of your organisation and the ACFID code. It also needs to have a commitment in there, and I won't read through it all, but it's quite prescriptive in this way about what that commitment is to, and a lot of thought goes into considering the wording as part of the code. Obviously, it needs to be consistent with the fundraising charter, and I encourage you to have a good look at that if you haven't yet, and also consistent with your privacy policy, which might be held as a separate document, but should have some overlap in that way. So when we look at Quality Principle 8, it dives down into a little bit more detail about what it might actually have in your EDMF. So your EDMF, the goal of it is to help your organisation have a framework for making decisions about what content to use in your public materials. So it needs to have a process in it that integrates a range of key staff. And I think this is quite an interesting point to think about the purpose behind this, and to recognise that, of course, there are differing opinions and interests and experiences within your organisation, and how we might use them to help make decisions consistently, and that reflect a whole bunch of different needs and objectives. It also needs to outline some clear responsibilities for approval for public use of images. And a good part of this, I think, is if you have a look at the EDMF, there's a section that asks you to include information on where can people go for extra help. If you're not sure about the answers to some of the questions that are in the EDMF, well, who do you ask in your organisation? Do you have someone who has information on privacy? Is there someone who is a gender expert who could help you? So who can people talk to, and who's responsible, not just for approving the images, but also for making those decisions? And we'll talk a bit more about that later and how that might apply in different organisational settings as well. The last point, again, I think is a really interesting one, and that it should include in all of your EDMF a process which recognises and balances both donors and affected people, but which gives primacy to the primary stakeholders. And those of you working in this area will know it's, you're constantly balancing different priorities and trying to make the best decision for the people that you're working for and with, and for your organisation as well. So those are the specifics in the code in relation to ethical decision-making frameworks. Now, there are also other requirements in the code around communications more generally. And in terms of communications, we're talking fundraising, marketing, anything that is to do with your public materials, advocacy, maybe newsletters with your donors, etc., or your supporters, sorry. So you're also asked to have things around, requirements around the collection of images, stories and information, and also a commitment to how you will communicate about other ACFID members. So I encourage you to have another look at Quality Principle 6, which is where the bulk of those are held. But these are the key things from a compliance perspective. When we're looking at your EDMFs or talking to you about it, these would be the basic and fundamental things that we would ask you to have in it. Again, so how you interpret that will be different depending on your organisation as well. All right, I think Jill's going to talk us through a little bit now about some of the steps involved in developing your own EDMF. And I just want to encourage you as well that, as I said, most of you probably have lots of things in place already. I know you do. And as part of the process of maybe thinking through an EDMF, just to work through what you already have in place. So even if you think you have these, it might still be worthwhile to work through these steps to see where there are areas where you might want to strengthen things or find gaps. Jill.
So I'm just going to go back to the website and take you through so how to create an EDMF, section 3. And there's a bunch of steps here, 8 steps, which you can go through chronologically, of course, but some of them will be concurrent with other steps. I'm not going to go through in too much detail unless maybe there's more questions at the end about these steps, but it's fairly straightforward. So reflecting on your values, this is going back to guiding documents, and of course looking at what are the key founding values that your organisation is based on, and how do those directly affect your storytelling? How do they change the way you tell stories? And really think quite deeply about your values and your foundations. Then, of course, looking through different policies that are related. And as Emily said, look for any gaps that might exist. Look at whether they're being implemented consistently or not. Why not? How can things change if they're not? And then, of course, the risk assessment, which I mentioned earlier, which is really important, especially if you've never done this before for communications. So I guess I'd just like to say at this point as well that the idea of doing the EDMF and going through a risk process isn't so that you take fewer risks. It's to understand your risk landscape. And I mean, ideally, it would help you to do new things as well because you understand that landscape. And of course, we want to look at our risks so that we protect our stakeholders as well as possible and look at any gaps that might be there that we hadn't seen before. But please don't look at, a risk assessment and just think, that ACFID is trying to constrain you, if perhaps that's what you're thinking. It's there to help you to create a more aware environment for your communications and help you to make better communications as well. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions in there. It's not comprehensive at all, but it's a good place to start. Yeah, basic risk matrix there, some resources as well. But that's quite an important step, and the outcomes from that process should be reflected in your EDMF itself, of course, because that's where you're helping to address those risks. Cool. So consultation within your organisation, of course, is really important. Different aspects, different parts of your organisation will have different views on your values and how they should be applied in practice. So it's really important to get that conversation started. The EDMF is all about conversation. It's all about having these structured discussions at different important moments, and those conversations helping you to create better decisions and helping you to explore your ethical landscape and your risk landscape. Of course, you want to consult with your partners as well. So that's an important step. And then, of course, drafting, socializing, and so on. Your EDMF, you know, as with any of your important documents that guide your organisation, it needs to be reviewed and monitored to see if it's doing its job. And I'm sure ACFID would like to hear back about your experience of using your EDMF as well, to help improve these guidance materials for future ACFID members.
Absolutely. So if you're thinking about implementing this for the first time or using it to help you review your current practices, then please get in touch with us, and we'd love to talk it through with you and find out how you're going, not from a compliance point of view, just purely learning together about these issues as well. So yeah, please take your time to have a look through those different steps there. And I thought what we might do now is I just wanted to share some ways with you that you might tailor the guidance to your organisation. So we know that, as I mentioned, in ACFID's membership, it is really diverse. And so with all things related to the code, how you apply it is meant to be commensurate to your size and the scope of your organisations, and we take that into account when taking a look at all your policies and documents as well. So one example I thought would be, we have a lot of members who are smaller organisations. They might have one, maybe two people working in a comms role, looking after all their fundraising and marketing activities. They might do social media and so on. So in that situation, a couple of things you might want to think about is how are you going to, or when are you going to also involve other people in your organisation in your decision making about comms? So if you're the only person who's constantly making those decisions, maybe there are times where you want to check in and have a broader number of people have input. You also might consider where you have slightly higher risk communications for the organisation. You might think, well, this is a really important work that we're doing at the moment. It has broader reach, perhaps the risks are greater. So how can you involve others and get different opinions? And you might put that into your EDMF. At this point in time, where we'll discuss this and here's who will be involved. Another thing with the smaller members is often they rely on partners on the ground who they have a really close connection with and a long-standing relationship. They're relying on their partners to source a lot of their communications materials, which is great. But something then you might think about in your EDMF is, okay, well, partners are really critical to the collection of materials. So how can we perhaps talk to them about helping them understand some of these issues in the ethical decision-making process itself? So maybe it's conversations, maybe it's training, but thinking about when you're implementing it as well, because they're such a critical part of your communications, how are you going to actually make sure that they maybe understand your processes, you use their expertise to understand the context in which they're working, and how can you work together to use the EDMF to really strengthen your materials. So that's one example for a smaller organisation. For, I guess, a larger organisation, you might have a slightly different approach, perhaps, and I know all organisations have this, but in larger organisations, you might have a whole suite of policies and procedures already about all sorts of things: informed consent, privacy, the storage of data, all those kinds of things. So you might like to think about how your EDMF can actually be used to pull all those things together and to give people a way of having a place to go and look and see, okay, how are decisions made in this organisation? What am I looking for? Who do I go to when I have a question or I'm not sure what to do? So in a larger organisation where you might have multiple teams involved at different points in time, it's going to be really important in your EDMF to be quite clear about who needs to be discussing what, when that should happen, and also where people can go to for extra help, and what to do if you sort of talked about it all in your team, but you don't know what to do still. So having those chains of escalation, I guess. So it could be something as simple as saying, you know, if you work through this process, you're not sure what to do, go and speak to your manager. If that's not applicable for your organisation, you might have something more specific on saying this person should be involved at this point, this person has the final say, and so on. So I know in some organisations, smaller ones, the CEO has final say on all communications, but that might not be applicable in yours. So I'd encourage you to think about the specifics and how your organisation is already running, and how you might be able to tie that in to create an overall framework for people so that they know what they should be deciding, making their decisions based on, and who should be involved, and how that is going to happen as well. So there are all sorts of ways that you might adapt your EDMF to your organisation. And again, we're really happy to have ongoing conversations about what that might look like as well. I think we might have a question. That's a great question, Robert. I hope everyone can see the questions as well. If you can't, maybe just type in, you can't see that. At the moment, in terms of EDMFs in other contexts, not that we're aware of, obviously we're always trying to align our guidance and what we're asking people to do where possible. But at the moment, I don't think, as far as I know, and Jill might correct me if she's come across any, but it's not something that's used or sourced overseas.
No, so this was a new exercise, Rob. The most similar document we found was the Duchess document from Ireland. So they have a guideline, they have a code of conduct for content and images and so on, and they have guidelines on how to roll that out. But still, it's not the same. Like an EDMF is more about the process and having a framework to address particular ethical issues at different times. So it's different to a policy in that it's not setting rights, wrongs, do this at this time, don't do this at that time. It's about exploring further all of those grey areas that we've been talking about. Does that answer your question?
I might actually just read the question out. Someone's indicated, has it come up? So, okay. Robert's just asked. Okay, you can click on Q&A. All right, I'll read it out. As an Australian arm of a larger international NGO, we often source our content from our international offices. Does this EDMF align with any similar documents in other countries so that we can have confidence in using content sourced this way? Indeed, you know if similar documents or procedures even exist. Yeah, and that's part of a larger conversation too about sourcing materials from partners, third parties as well. So
yeah, but your EDMF can address questions related to that. yeah, when you go through the key moments, you'll see that, you know, sourcing materials from elsewhere is in there at the top somewhere. And you can apply those key issues to the sourcing of international content and ask those key questions of the content that you're getting. Yeah, it's designed to be quite flexible and more about the issues you face rather than so much that, I guess, the mechanics of, yeah, how things flow. But see how you go.
Okay, so we're coming up to having a bit of a question and answer time now, but I thought I'd preempt a couple of questions that I've already been asked as part of the consultation and just in discussions with people. So do you need a standalone EDMF to be code compliant? No, you don't. This guidance has been written for a standalone EDMF, but if your organisation chooses to, you could integrate it into your current communications policy or set of policies and procedures that you already have. So it doesn't need to be a whole document on its own. You might choose to do that, but in terms of code compliance, no, it doesn't. Another one, some of you might know that there are various parts of the code that we ask members to extend the requirement to their partners. This is not one of them. So we're not asking you to make your partners comply with your EDMF if that's not something you wish to do. We're also not asking that they have to have one of their own. Obviously, depending on how you work with your partners and how that operates, you might like to, maybe should, think about how you might incorporate them into either the design of the EDMF and particularly the implementation as well. So as we've talked about, and Jill just sort of mentioned, how is an EDMF different to your other policies? Again, you're likely to have, I'm sure you have policies already around some of your communications, but this is really about setting out what your organisational framework is for making decisions. So it's not just telling people that you must have informed consent or what that will look like or how you will get that. It's about how can you look at a piece or content and decide whether that's what you want to use as an organisation as well. And does your EDMF have to include everything in the guidance document? No, this is just an example for you to take away and have a look at and work with. As I talked about before, there are some things in the code that we would really ask for, but the guidance document is really designed as an initial guidance document, not the be all and end all as well. So yeah, encourage any feedback on that as you start using it. All right, just to finish off, just wanted to highlight that there are a lot of additional resources held in the guidance document online and in the PDF, links to it. As you can see here, there's a whole bunch of different toolkits. There's, if you want to take it even further and look up some research articles, there's a couple of ACFID and relevant DFAT documents there as well.
And the DOTCHES document that I was mentioning, that's included in these resources if you want to have a look at that. And yeah, all of the documents that we could find that were relevant to creating this document. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. And just again to highlight that there are those fact sheets there as well. That might be a good starting point for some of the issues. So hopefully they'll be useful to you. Okay, well that brings us to the end of the presentation side of things, I guess. We've got some time now, at least 10 minutes to take some questions if you have any. If you'd like, you can type your questions in. Otherwise, we're also happy to do questions verbally. So as Vicky mentioned at the beginning, if you do want to do that, just click your raise your hand button and bear with us while we try and make this work. All very quiet at the moment.
No questions.
we'll just give people a little bit of time in case there's a bit of a delay. No, okay. So if there are no questions today, that's fine. Hopefully we've answered a lot of them for you. As we said at the beginning, if you still want to get in touch with either Jill or myself, and you have comments, questions, feedback, we'd really love that. We're very keen to keep this conversation going. And if your organisation is beginning to think about an EDMF for the first time, or if you're thinking about implementing it amidst other things, we'd really like to hear from you, and just to be able to see how different people, different organisations are interpreting it and using it. So that we would really welcome that as well.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
But yeah, thanks very much everyone for your interest today. We hope that you get a lot out of the EDMF guidance, that it opens up lots of new ideas and doors for your organisation. And yeah, have fun using it.
Thanks everyone. I think Vicky's just got a few things to point out before we leave. So.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Emily, for the great presentation. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Now, please stay and complete a quick survey. We are very keen to hear your feedback. If you have any questions, just you can always email our code team. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.